Well, considering that we were kind of deprived of a few minutes yesterday, will anyone be offended if I go ahead and start? Because it looks like most of us are here anyway. So, I wanted to just kind of review again, because reviewing is a major part of teaching and of learning. If you have ever read John Milton's Gregory's 7 Laws of Teaching, number 7 is review, 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 review. So we have already come up with these memorization tips from the ancients of using mnemonics, the association by images, sounds, and perceptions, with images, visual images being recognized as the most powerful, the strongest, the easiest to help the mind remember, to pull it out of that long-term memory. We also will always remember our story about Simonides and being able to remember by locating things. Everybody recognized daily practice and repetition was essential. You could not memorize something one day and then not repeat it or review it for 6 months and then try to say it again. That just would not work. That daily repetition, or at least regular repetition, is quite necessary. And that breaking a larger section of text or a larger work into smaller parts and then putting them back together is a very important strategy or technique. And yesterday, I just got into Hugh of St. Victor and his wonderful essay about the best three ways to memorize, the best 3 ways to help memorize with learning history, and that was the classification by numbers, classification by location, and classification by association. I think he was just trying to be creative, because what is classification by numbers? How is that different from what we've already been talking about? It's essentially the same. And if you recall, let's see if I can find it. This is an example of one of the ways he used numbers, a number grid, to associate. And he's the one who memorized all 150 Psalms, because it was easier to memorize them than to turn the pages to find the one that you wanted to refer to. He also, this grid not only utilizes numbers and a sense of numbers, but this is an example of his trying to memorize chronology, his classification of order, because he's trying to show his students how they can memorize all of the patriarchs and all of the descendants from Adam. And so, again, the visual image, but he's using it in numerical order, and then he's also showing the chronology of it. Now, some visual images aren't going to be as pertinent for showing chronology. If you think about the seraph's wings, I don't know which is the first wing of the 6, but it's kind of easy to start in a column and think, okay, the top left, and we'll go down, and then we'll go to the right column. So I just wanted to explain this. Numbers and letters are not the only thing. I think we kind of touched on this very briefly yesterday. Are not the only symbols that can be used to create organization or order. John of Salisbury commented in his work Metalogicon that musical notes are highly effective for comprehension. Musical notes. So if you think about the ABC song, it's the same tune we use for the ABCs, we use for Mary Had a Little Lamb. We use that same tune because it's effective. And so you may ask a very young student, okay, what's the next letter after F? And then you just see them going, and so that they can bring it out. So one of the options that I always offered my students was that if they did not want to recite to me, they could sing it. I actually had one or two who were willing to do that. They weren't singing in front of the class, but that was enough of an aid to help them so that they were able to do that. Okay, I kind of want to make sure, yes?
If you don't mind, can I just play something?
Sure.
That I found this the song for the quadratic formula, and my students were really able to do well. And at first, I had two kids in the class, my son and then somebody else, and at first they were like, but like for my son especially, I would play in the car. I couldn't get away from it. But, they ended up learning it, no problem, they had it.
Well, I mean, why are the Shirley Grammar Champs so effective? It's because we're using, incorporating a little bit of music. I really was fascinated by Dr. Calvert's assertion that music is the culmination, kind of everything of the quadrivium and the trivium pointing to that. I'm going to have to think on that. I know of at least one literature professor, not my husband, but a different literature professor who thinks literature is the culmination. So, interesting. But anyway, so music, do not hesitate, even if you're not the music teacher, don't hesitate to bring it in. And especially if you're not the music teacher, you might be more comfortable going to the real basic tunes that you can handle. I can handle Mary Had a Little Lamb. So that might be the tune that I use. And I would be very respectful to the students, explaining that I understand they could handle a more sophisticated tune, but that I could not. But your students might, you might be able to work them into a pretty sophisticated tune to be able to do that. So, but organization and the ordering, using visual images, using music as much as you can. These are the tips. These are the methods that have been used for millennia, and that the progressive teachers decided, no, we don't really need them. That's demeaning. I cringed just slightly inside when Dr. Calvert was talking about rote memory. Again, because I hear so many teachers, not classical teachers, but other teachers that are just so against anything that's rote, thinking that that's mechanical learning. Whereas, in fact, what they're doing is creating the mechanical learning, because they're just training the ability to reproduce exactly what they have, and not the ability to go out, to think outside the box. But I digress. There's two other things that I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to talk about today. And one of them is, what are the challenges? What challenges do you face when you're trying to work with your students in your classroom to get them to memorize? And this is not a rhetorical question. I'm expecting responses from this. But what are the challenges? I have experience with some of the challenges, but I want to know from you what challenges you have. Yes?
Different learners, some pick it up a lot faster than others, and they're trying to kind of meet everybody's needs.
Absolutely. I mean, the student who is a natural memorizer, learns 30 lines the next day and can just, how demoralizing is that to the other students in the classroom? Well, yeah. So having the range of ability of students that could work for 6 months on something and still struggle with remembering, that's a definite challenge. What other?
There's always one or two kids who kind of make their way through it and mouth, they're not really participating. And usually that's more of a disciplinary issue, but at what point do you just let that child, okay, you're making your bed, and I took 10th grade. But I'll let the parents know that that's happening. I'll talk to the student one-on-one, but it's seems like every year, like, a personality type that just does not want to stand up and do those things, and, you know, they're obedient to the point where they're up there going through the motions, but they're not actually memorizing or externalizing
Right.
or reciting with their classmates.
Right. So, they're just simply not doing it. They're faking it. I like the way you said it. They're just faking it. So, yeah, like I did it. Okay. What's another one?
Parents.
You know, you said parents, and I thought, come on, somebody pick that up. Yeah. What about parents? What's the challenge about parents?
Well, they're not reinforcing it at home, or they're not, they don't understand what we're doing, and so they're not encouraging them to be
Mhm.
speaking it, practicing it there, or they just don't get it.
Yeah, absolutely. You think as a teacher that you're going to teach the students, but you know that actually you're teaching parents. I mean, the longer you're teaching, the more you're having to teach the parents as well as the students. And I mean that respectfully.
I also think that's a lot of the difference between the kids, at least at a younger age, are the ones who seem like they can go home and memorize 3 lines in a day, and the ones who don't. And it's not really that most kids are more capable of doing that. It's that when they get home, they don't get
Mhm.
reinforced, and so they can't understand what's the big deal. And they look at the kids who are good at it, and how do they do that? It's usually the parents, not that the kids aren't capable.
Right, it's a different. The students that wonder how can they do that are forgetting that they spent 4 hours watching TV, whereas the students who can do that probably went home and the first thing their parents did was, okay, what's the home? Oh, we're going to do the first 10 lines. Oh, we need to work on this. So, absolutely. Any other problems?
I know my son, when, like, trying to learn catechesis, struggles sometimes just because there's words that are difficult, he can't pronounce them, and ones that he doesn't know what it means.
Right.
Sometimes that's challenging.
He's memorizing a foreign language that happens to be English, he's told, but yeah, it's just, what? So, the catechesis is written in a pattern, but that doesn't help when you're not sure that vocabulary. That's a really good point. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say, grammar students can learn without, can memorize without knowing the vocabulary.
Yeah, and he does. It's just,
Yeah.
sometimes, do you know what that word means? No?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
a teaching moment for you to say, let's talk about that. Now, keep saying it. Say it, even just the word itself, right? Just keep saying that word, because,
It's incredible what their potential is.
yeah.
They learn it, but yeah, they don't
But-
always understand it or.
Yeah, but it's that big bump in the road along the way. So somebody, yeah.
I'm a music teacher, and especially in piano lessons, just the memorizing for like a short amount of time, or like even in the classroom, memorizing for the test and then forgetting it, but then you need that knowledge later. And in music, it's hard to always go back and practice that same song again, so they forget it really easily. But we need to play that song later in the future, so they memorize it for the thing where muscle memory, they do a lot of muscle memory instead of really figuring out a way to internalize it and keep it for that.
Yeah, they keep it in that short term, and they don't get it in that long term for later. So somebody,
I think sometimes it's just the attitude that maybe there's a lot to memorize, and that's going to be too hard, I can't do it. But if you think positively, yes, I can do this, and work at it like in chunks, or that it is possible.
yeah, and especially in the current environment where memorizing isn't valued. It just simply isn't valued because we live in the technological age. And again, you can Google everything. I was with a group of adults, and they were just marveling over this new way to do self-studies for an accreditation, and I thought, because they're going to do it on the cloud. And I'm thinking, well, that's great until we have the first set of sunspots, and that wipes out, may not quite have it accurately, but anything ever happens to that cloud, that's going to grind our civilization to a halt because people have gotten so accustomed to not remembering. So we really have an uphill I mean, we may be like the Irish monasteries in the 6th century, being the remnants that can still remember how to calculate and how to write and read and remember things, because it's not getting taught. Well, there's lots of other challenges, but let's take the ones that we've gotten, and let's try to brainstorm about suggestions. And the ones that you've mentioned, I had thought of a few of them myself, and if I forget one that you have brought up, let's be sure and talk about it. Students don't realize that memorizing is a tool for learning, okay? Now, I'm thinking probably of older students that are transferring into your school. I remember the shock that our son had when we moved from the first move out of Oklahoma. He was in the 6th grade. We moved to Wisconsin, and he started confirmation, and we were so excited because we got into a parochial school. He had 600 Bible verses to memorize. Well, everyone in his class had been working on them since kindergarten, and then boom, in a shorter amount of time than they did, he had to memorize it. He had not been taught to memorize, and so he had not been building up his store of memorized verses. He managed, but it was a challenge. So I think if you have older students, you need to draw their attention to the fact that just as they practice their penmanship because they need to be able to write, they practice their computations because they need to be able to calculate, they practice their mind memory muscle so that they can draw out information that they will need later, because they may not make that, they're not going to intuitively realize that. So one possible suggestion I would say is make sure you're pointing out this memory assignment is going to make you smarter and stronger and able to leap tall buildings, because they'll believe you. You're their teacher. So, does anyone want to add something to that about if just literally pointing out to the students?
Well, through the Classical Conversations program, they do a memory master, which means that you memorize every piece of information and you have to say it 3 times.
Okay.
That's it. Having gone through that experience a couple times, I have one child who has a very, very difficult time, and it took 10 times as long as her sister who's the same age, who got it first out of the whole community, and then she was probably last. But having gone through it, what I saw is a complete change in her confidence level when it came to approaching the following year, because she knew she could do it. She knew that the memory was there, and that 624 facts she was able to say, over an hour and a half of 3 times in a row. Now things are much easier for her.
Good. That's good. Someone else? Yeah.
When I taught middle school, the children always did groan about the Shirley jingles, because they were childish or silly. And so what I would do was try to bring value to it by something they could relate to, and I would bring up, how many commercial jingles do you know? And of course they could all tell me quite a few at the time, and then I related it then to the Shirley jingles to say, you're going to learn these like that, like the commercials, which you're going to retain it for your knowledge to put it all together.
That's good.
And that actually made it more valuable, and then they didn't feel as silly, or we could make it more fun too. Practice it, or bring in movement, or have them bring in a different rhythm or something.
Yeah. Maybe getting it out of the jingle mode into a rap mode or something.
Right.
I'm not sure that's a step forward. Okay, parents. And again, several of you brought up parents. I think with classical schools, we're so busy educating the parents what classical education is, that we also need to take a part of that time to explain, and that includes memorizing and the value. You've got to teach the parents the value of memorizing, just like you have to teach the parents the value of homework and the value of Latin so that they will go, oh, okay, I said I would support the school, so that means, and send your parents an expectation list. And so, okay, we're going to be working on the Ten Commandments. 5 minutes a day, you need to listen to your student, your child, recite commandment, whatever. And then the second week, you build it up to 7 minutes. You know, give it something that's concrete for the parents to understand, because remember, they don't know. And you can even challenge the parents to memorize along with their children. Some parents, especially if they're unchurched, you know, there's a whole nother issue of parenting that we can't solve, which is memorizing. But you do need to educate the parents. And if you have a student who is struggling and you can't quite figure out why, and you do some, you know, very careful questioning, and you find out, well, they're a latchkey kid, you know, there's nobody at home afterwards, and so they do just go home and watch TV, or they go online and just, you know, surf stuff. Gently and very respectfully, you know, talk with the parent about how can we help that student get a more structured time where they can focus on memorizing and focus on doing their homework, because that student is going to have a lot of different issues as well, I would suspect. But I'm just saying, work with your parents, and if it's necessary, kind of taking the teaching approach.
We've had parents, our school has had a huge decline in parent pushback on the curriculum, but we made huge efforts to over-communicate the expectations. So we send out a parent letter at the beginning of the summer for your incoming class, and, you know, say things like, they're going to have these facts memorized, work on this over the summer, and then at the beginning of the year, we give them course guides, even in, you know, kindergarten for each grade, that lay out a Jackquelyn. And we also have 4, like, open houses just for the homeschool families where they come in. We started that last year. And the team's really nervous because you're inviting parents in for an hour and a half to see, like, a little showcase of what the kids have done that quarter, and then also just like a formal lesson. But we found that the parents just they partner with you so much more because they know what's going on, and they see you at work, and they're, you know, it's amazing how supportive they can be when they are, like, right along beside you, seeing what you're doing and how many kids you can manage at a time. They're, you know, they're I think more appreciative of what they're working with.
Good. Yeah, I think every effort you spend on parents pays off. It may not pay off for you in your classroom that year. It's going to pay off for some teacher sometime. So.
You could also point out that first thing, this is a fancy word for memorization with children with learning disabilities. For our son, who has communication difficulties from neurological problems. That is what the doctors use, you know, a 5-sentence memorization for. This is what you do when you go to the library.
Yes, absolutely.
They may use it as a very practical way to approach it. Even doctors use memorization for children with learning disabilities.
Exactly. Children with special needs thrive under structure, and no child is harmed by structure. So that's a very good point.
I think in teaching the parents how to teach their kids, like, go back to music, if a kid has to memorize something or learn something, I will send step-by-step instructions for the parent so that they understand, because in a way, like, they probably get scared about, oh, this long thing they have to memorize, how in the world do I do this? So I will send home, okay, this is one way that you can help your child learn this. You might not know everything, but you can help them and you can do it.
Absolutely. Several times, and it helps in several different ways, but there's nothing wrong with recording yourself and sending as many tapes home as necessary so that the parents can hear you and hear what their students are supposed to produce. The parents can either then be the practice leader at home or at least let the students use the tape itself. There's a lot of different ways that can happen. Okay, let's talk about the students, the range of students' memory abilities, the student who learns overnight versus the student that it takes a long time. But what can we do to kind of help with that? Any suggestions?
We try to memorize at home every month. I had 3 pre-K last year and I have kindergarten this year. And I guess for some of them that don't want to participate, maybe giving them, everyone, usually the student of the week, whoever is the one that gets to point to all the words is up there and follow along and that kind of thing. And maybe just picking out those students that don't know it as well, giving them a part in that, or having them keep a beat with an instrument or a poem or something so that at least they're doing something, and maybe that just will encourage them to hear it again.
Right. That they're given responsibility and affirmed and all that progressive talk, but yeah, that helps them out. I like your idea. You probably send the poem home to the parents as well, so the parents can kind of know what it is, and parents may or may not know how well their child can memorize. So you might even early in the before school starts or at the beginning of the year, just ask parents to kind of gauge how well or how poorly their child's memory is, and ask parents to be kind of alert and giving the parents heads up when there's going to be a memory assignment. So in other words, what I'm trying to suggest is that maybe giving the assignments out earlier, even though you don't start working on it in class. But if a parent knows knows in August, okay, this long, all of these verses will need to be memorized by the Christmas program, they could go ahead and start working on the stanzas. And even though your class may not start until after Halloween. So I'm kind of saying let's be flexible with the date of when we give out material. The daily choral recitation and practice, and of allowing different students to be the leaders, is going to be really powerful. You might even want to, once you get away from having it pointing out the words when it's all from memory, set up a schedule so that the students know the day that they're going to be responsible for a particular line. And maybe all they have to do is know that one line, but they can be sure that they're ready for that one line. And so as you have 2 or 3 students leading the group, that one student is going to be able to lead on the line that he or she is responsible for. That's maybe something that might help.
Usually, I have at least 3 different grades, sometimes 4 in class.
Right.
And I always, this year we memorized the whole chapter on the 8. And we usually do a big long poem for the end of the year program, and I just work on it the whole time. Or a whole bunch of little small ones, but we almost always memorize by me saying a line and repeating it. And then I end up with doing hand signals for them, which is nothing complicated, but when you get into, like, is it Christ the Lord or the Lord Jesus Christ or whatever, here's Lord, here's Christ, that's God, and this is no, and this is say, and that kind of thing. I always lead them, and then so I can just do like that to them, But that seems to pretty much cover everybody, where I say it, they repeat it, and I'm up there doing things for them. Not every word, but just a little memory jogger. And I haven't really had anybody who by the end can't do the whole thing if I'm just doing little bits of clues for them.
In the areas where you know it could be confusing.
Right. It doesn't have to be
Because
everything.
the Lord Jesus Christ or Jesus Christ Lord.
And I had a group of, I think it was second grade class, we did the whole high memorization, and we all, and they got to ask God a little bit, but, just little clues of much of the stuff, where I was sort of directing them like a song leader would, just little things like that, and they all could do it.
For that to work with older students, I would have the older students even responsible for the little physical clues. And that might, again, the first couple of times, they're going to be kind of thinking, well, that's a younger
I think they appreciate it.
But they appreciate it, and once they've done it a couple of times, they're going to be very fine with that. Okay, let's talk about and kind of brainstorm on the student who's overwhelmed. Just because you hand out the 23rd Psalm and you say, okay, we're going to memorize this in a month. And you're thinking a month, that's easy. And that kid is seeing the encyclopedia. You know, he's just really overwhelmed with it. Obviously, we've talked about breaking it down into baby steps. And some students, I mean, you're going to break it down and break it down, and you're going to break it down to where you're almost doing word by word. That's where that visualization will really be helpful for them, because they're concentrating either so much on the forest they can't see the words, or so much on every word that they can't figure out how to put it together. So you want to break it down in a meaningful way for them, that they can remember it and then also put it back together. Now, will every student need this? No, not every student will need this. Engage your students, and this would have to be done very carefully, but engage the whole class in what's an image? What's an image that is going to bring this phrase together? You know, the Lord is my shepherd. Well, it's very, I would be very surprised if you didn't have, frequently there's the painting of Christ as the shepherd, and so that could be picture number one. The Lord is my shepherd. Yes.
As a music teacher, and this works with all levels, I think success breeds success. So we're learning a hymn with 5 verses. Each hymn has a different color. So it's like, okay, you know we've got blue done, so today we're going on. But we come at it like, I got blue done, so now I can go on, and it's just, like I said, we build it that way.
Exactly.
Success just breeds that.
Yeah, I like that. Success breeds success. So how do we get our students who struggle to feel like they are being successful? Using color coding the hymns is great. Using art as the visual image, anything that's going to help. Yes.
I work with a lot of kids who are fully immersed in the progressive system. So they come to me for tutoring or tutor classes. And a lot of them have the mindset that, oh, I'm just not good at something. You know, whether it's a subject, or especially when I have them memorize. They're like, oh, I'm not good at it. But I've taught them that when they say that, I said, okay, you're not good at it, so what does that mean? And then they cry and say, I need it. But that's just the mentality over and over. I'm not good at something, or it's hard. That's not an excuse. You know, what does that mean? That means you need to practice. And then we break it down and go, well, how are you going to practice? And then that's a strategy too. But that's just content. And so, of course, I'm not perfect either. And so when I mess up when I'm teaching, I say, oh, what do I need to do? You know, you need to practice.
Yeah, see, that's the kind of conversation you need to have intentionally with students, because they think that they should, just because they're breathing, that it should be easy. Because our environment tells you if it's not easy, don't do it. If you're not having fun, don't do it. If it's not what you want to do, don't do it. And school isn't set up like that. Education isn't like that. But that's not the message that they would choose. So just have that talk. I love that you're just saying, oh, you're not good at it? So what does that mean? My high school students, when I would do the memory work, and they would practice. I mean, no, that was a concept. They just said, no, what is this practice? And I said, oh, well, let me think about it. Aren't you on the basketball team? And don't you like to make baskets and get points? Yeah. Well, were you born that way? You could dunk when you were a baby? No, you practiced. Of course, the motivation of valuing what I wanted to teach them versus the value of winning the game and being a star, that was a little different. But to me, overcoming student reluctance to memorize, especially in a situation where you're not dealing with a classical environment, but you're actually dealing with, as you say, progressively educated individuals. Motivating the students, convincing them they can do it. It is in their brain, and if I knew this child well enough and long enough, and they still wanted to try this, oh, I can't do it, I would possibly say, I think we need you to go to the doctor then. You know, you may need an examination if you're telling me you cannot memorize. How are you talking to me? How did you remember the words to say that? And how did you come up with this argument? So, again, I wouldn't be sarcastic with students unless I knew them very, very well and they could take it in the right avenue. But, my students always demonstrated the ability to memorize, because they could rattle off the statistics for their basketball team players like nobody's business. But vocab, what? Yeah. So overcoming that motivation of what's valuable, the knowledge that's valuable.
Well, I mean, it's like relating it, keep constantly relating it to things they know and appreciate, like the basketball. Well, do you want to be able to relate to or rattle off those statistics when you're older? Well, you need to practice these things now, because that's going to give you that ability. And I always think, I always love my ideas so wonderfully, but they're not always the best, and a lot of times the kids can come up with great ways to help them themselves learn. You know, if you kind of prompt the kid to say, okay, what do you find in this? Not what do I find in this for you, but what do you see? Like, what picture do you relate this to? Not what do I
know, and our students are all the center of their own universe. And so when we're working with numbers, I could have them practice my Social Security number, but they could care less. But their telephone number, their address, their birth date, if you can go ahead and adapt the practice exercise to incorporate them. One of the things that just was very easy, this was a little off of memorizing, but using their names in sentences instead of using, and in stories, instead of using whatever name is in the story in the textbook, because they can't wait to hear when is their name is going to be used. But again, I'm kind of digressing. We talked a little bit about when students are being asked to memorize words they don't know, and about how that's a great opportunity for teaching them. Because if you think about it, what did they start out as babies? Did they know any vocabulary when they were born? And they had to learn it. They learned it by association. Mama, daddy, grandma, food, milk, more. You know, they learned it by association. Remind them that as babies, as infants, they didn't know vocabulary meanings. And so the way they learned it was by hearing new words. And sometimes I'll say, okay, this is a 50-cent word. And it's especially helpful if they've started studying Latin, and you can bring in if there's any Latin connection, to tie that in, because, or even start saying, this is a word you're going to run across when you learn Latin, if they haven't started it yet, because you're going to already know some words, you're making connections that you don't realize that you're going to be using later. So, what were some of the other problems, challenges? Did we kind of cover most of them? Do you feel like you're hearing some ideas that are going to help you? Okay, I wanted to also just talk real quickly about this book, Andrew Campbell. I'm not necessarily promoting it and suggesting that you go out and buy it. I think you probably already have your own memorization material, and that's what he is. The most of this is a collection of that. If you were brand new starting with your first child, I might say it would be worth it. But at the beginning of the book, he has a little introduction to people who have not been in classical education why memorizing is important. And so I wanted to share some of his thoughts on that. As I say, it's a resource. It's a very short introduction, and then it's just selections of materials, Latin and Greek selections, historical, geographical, hymns, folk songs, lists that do come from Christian orthodoxy. That is one thing. It's not a secular book necessarily. And he envisions that you would take 13 years to, and so it's a resource for kindergarten up, preschool and up. And he also says you don't memorize everything. You don't need to know everything. Think about what's really important. That's what you want your children to be memorizing. He lists reasons to incorporate memorization in classes. First, that memory is a basic human faculty. It's an unused one now, but it is a basic human faculty. It is a mental ability that people have. Second, research indicates that exercising your memory regularly is key to lifelong mental health. I'm not sure that's going to impress a kindergartner. That might be something that a parent had not thought about, though. Lifelong mental health. 3, memory implies and creates order. Implies and creates order. And that is what we need. Personally, I think when they stopped doing outlining and went to mind mapping, that was a step backwards. Because what is mind mapping except this big jumble that is, they call it organized, but I don't know what's first or second. I don't know what's more important and what's less important. The outline made sense to me. So, 4, a good memory is essential to good writing. Because how can they write well if they have poor or little vocabulary? Of course, I would also say reading is essential to good writing also. So, 5, memory promotes greater fluency in speech, accustoming ourselves to the flow of language. Because when we memorize, we hopefully get our students past the choppiness of just the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. No, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. We want them to pick up the flow of emotion in that, the flow of meaning in it, which they can't do if they don't even remember what they're saying. 6, a good memory is necessary to master Latin, Greek, and I can see our students saying, and I have no desire to master Latin and Greek, and mathematics. So, every student you have who wants to be a doctor but doesn't want to memorize, tell them, not on my body, you're not practicing. No. So connect their goals, their future. What are their dreams? What profession have they thought about wanting to be? Now, I do recognize that they're not necessarily realistic goals. They may want to be a rodeo clown. Well, if you want to be a rodeo clown, you better know your mathematics, because you better be able to calculate where you need to be. So I'm just saying, try to again help them see, even though they can't see it, that their memory is building connections to their future. And finally, his last point. Your memory is always with you. You never leave it at home. He actually said you will never leave it forgotten at home. So, and he told a story about how when his mother was dying of cancer, she could no longer hold books to read. She didn't have the ability to see to read anymore, but she could remember from her childhood, the hymns and the scripture verses. And so she could recite them, even though she could no longer read or see them. And what a comfort that was.
But they're singing it, and the kids are walking away going, how did they know those words? Because they learned it.
Yeah, because they memorized it.
And then they see how
Yeah. Okay, so Mr. Campbell also, these were his reasons that we should incorporate memorization in his classes. He's also got some tips. Now, I'm going to share these tips with you, but as I share them with you, I want you to think, that sounds a lot like classification by number. So in other words, where are the roots of the memory tips that he's going to share with us? Number one, listen to the material. Listen to the material with choral recitation, pair dictation, or recording. Okay. The ancients would never have dreamed of not listening and not repeating. So that's just very obvious. A tip of reciting the material by chanting and singing it. That's John of Salisbury, at least. Normally, what people call memory work is to read it, cover it up, and then say it again, right? That's normally what it's called. If that's the only way a student is memorizing, that is not as effective as bringing in some of the other language things, the oral practice in class of hearing it and saying it. Seeing it is the strongest, but if they hear it and they can repeat it, that's giving them the opportunity to create that mental image inside their forehead where they're reading it. Whereas if they're looking at it on paper, that's not necessarily putting it into the inside of their forehead. You know what I mean? Okay. So singing it, writing it out, teaching that muscle memory, writing it out. I will not put tax on the seats. I will not put tax on the seats. They're not going to do that again, because if they do, that they get another 50 sentences, so I will not put tax on the seats. Now, I have to admit that I was always frustrated as an administrator that students had to write as a punishment, because it shouldn't be a punishment. I said, make them do their math facts, because that will benefit them, and they have to do that multiple times, but for some reason it was always. So having them write out the memory assignment, speaking it certainly, reading it certainly, but have them write it out from memory. So if you have a time where you have opening work or bell work, okay, everybody write line 3, because you've taught them lines 1, 2, 3. Write line 3 on the index card, pass it to your neighbor, check it. Did they have line 3 correctly? So that is another way that Campbell recommends doing that. Memorize in context. Memorize in context. This is where he's saying too often the trivium becomes trivia. Don't require students to memorize science facts or history dates before they encounter them in the natural course of their studies. Arrange your memory work in a way that fits your curriculum. Don't just cram it in. Now, I wonder what you think of that principle, of that concept. I like the don't just cram it in, but the idea that don't require them to memorize facts or dates before they encounter them in the natural course of their studies. What do you think of that?
It's not grammar.
I don't think grammar is grammar.
Okay.
I guess with catechesis, I would expect that most students wouldn't understand in full what they're memorizing, but it's still useful to memorize those things. You need, because it's putting them for the future, so, I mean, maybe he's talking about more related, I think there's definitely connections for students with morals and, most exams can be applied in the classroom, especially in number 4, which is my favorite. But, I mean, I don't think that students understand in full, especially in the lower grades, but they are set to click to memorize, and it is going to, it might click to them in the logic stage, so I don't think it's not useful to do that.
Well, he does specifically talk about science, facts, or history days. So he's not talking about catechesis or any doctrinal understanding.
Well, I'm homeschooler,
Okay.
so in talking with other homeschoolers, classes we educate, not all Lutheran, and we talk about the point of memorization, and we talk a lot about how it's a framework that you're building, the organizational framework. So let's say you hear 1789, and you memorize it in 1789, George Washington's going to happen, and in 1789 you've also memorized something else. And I pose to my own children that two different cycles of memory that we've done. They go, oh, you know what, in 1789 this happened, but guess what, that also happened. And they hadn't read about that necessarily or whatever. They made that connection in their brain because they had memorized those two events on the same day.
Yeah.
So my point is, it's a framework that you are building onto as you encounter in later years.
Yeah, see, I was somewhat troubled with this particular tip, because I was not sure that I agreed with it.
Getting away from ages and stages, though, I mean, as we think about even adult learning in the classical model, yes, we can learn grammar and do this logic dialectic part together. So you might say, hey, we're going to talk about this and encounter it in both your memorization and in your, let's just say reading. I think that's valuable. But I think if we say we can't ever do that, then we don't have grammar students.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that you all had the same reservation about that that I did.
Jackie, some of that has its place, let's say, in your, I'm thinking maybe in older students in your Latin area. I mean, be in your Latin classes. I mean, I would remember it more as I studied the Latin all the time, rather than say, I think if that only time I practiced it at the beginning of the day, divorced from everything else that goes on, but at the Latin time, maybe you're stopping and you're making a connection, but it would fit me more if I were already engrossed in that.
What else did happen in 1789?
French Revolution.
Yeah, the French Revolution. One of the French Revolutions. So. Okay. So I was not as impressed with that particular memory tip that he gave, but he has more. So schedule your memory work and recitation time. Use it as a warm-up or as an ending review. However you do it is up to you, but be consistent. So if you have a specific day of the week that you pull out everything to memorize, or if you have a specific time of the day that you do it, he's suggesting that if you always do it, then your students will become accustomed to, okay, now it's time to do it, our memory work, and yes, we just automatically do it. So I thought that was not too bad. Tip, less is more. Okay, we've certainly been hearing and breaking it down into smaller parts to try to memorize, and then putting the parts together to build is easier. It's more effective to learn a little bit every day than to try to learn it all at once. There's nothing more daunting than sitting down to memorize a long list. So remind your students that their job right now is to memorize this amount. Just focus on this. Use the rhyme scheme as a cue to the next line, or if you have alliteration, if you have any kind of pattern. Try to find patterns, break them into as many patterns as you can. The Beatitudes are wonderful patterns. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the poor. Learn categories. or categories, and then fill in the categories. So, review.
Are you talking like kingdom, violent, class, order?
Yes.
That sort of category, and then you can fill in.
Well, any way you can come up with a category.
Okay.
Literature could be genre,
Okay.
or authors, or I mean, you can come up with categories for whatever the area is. So, review. Now, I'll take a few minutes. He has a review system that he calls a memory work binder. Now, this may seem more work than you're interested in, but I think he's got a principle behind it that is valuable. Label and set up tabs in a binder that say today, and then the next set of tabs say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The next set of tabs are numbered 1, 2, 3 through 31, and then the very last tab is labeled future. That's a lot of tabs, I'll admit. So if you don't want to do it in a binder, if you want to do it in one of those expandable file folders, he's just suggesting that somehow you set up this system. You copy out the memory work that you want your students to learn. You put it behind. That would be in the future. Everything's not going to go in today. So you have your future, then you pick what you want to work on today and put behind the Today tab. Every day, you work through the material that is behind the Today tab. You listen to it, you speak it, you write it, you read it, you use all your language arts doing it. When the student can recite the piece correctly, place it behind the tab for the day after next. So if the student can do it perfectly on Monday, take it and put it behind the Wednesday tab. Okay? You're taking it out from today, because today they did it. Let's put it behind the tab 2 days from now, so that they're going to review it every other day for 2 weeks. Okay. They've demonstrated that they know it. They have it in their short-term memory. So for 2 weeks, it's just every other day. Then, if they're still saying it perfectly, then place it behind one of the Monday or Friday tabs, and you're going to start writing on it. You're going to start putting dates on it, where they only do it on that Monday or Friday for 4 weeks. You've gone from every other day to once a week. And you're assuming that they're still able to pull it out perfectly. And when they've been able to say it perfectly, and again, you're writing down the dates so that you know, oh, this is a once a month or once a week thing. Then you put it behind the number tab or whatever day of the month, date of the month it is. So if it's January 7th, you're going to put it behind the 7th. Then, when that number of the month comes around, you're going to review that again. So you're getting it from every day to every other day to once a week to once a month. That's the main essence of this system, whatever your system is. Using this, let me finish this description. Using this system on any given day, a student is practicing everything behind the Today's tab, everything behind the Day of the Week tab, and everything behind the date of the month tab.
So when they don't have it completed, it's every day?
Well, yeah, go back to
So
it
you'll
every day.
just keep going every day until they've done it perfectly, then start doing it every other?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, again, that's describing it actually seems simpler than when I was looking at it the way he wrote it up in the book. But the point is that you want your students, and I'm thinking of the success here, when they realize, wait a minute, I can remember something that I learned a month ago, and I can still say it. I can do this. I've got a memory muscle that's working. I'm flexing my muscle, so to speak. I can apply that practicing, and I know I have the confidence whatever I'm working on today I'm going to get to that same point. This is also a good way to be building. So when you have a long part that you've broken down into the small, you know you don't just always focus on the individual parts. At some point you're going to start putting them together. And so this system would allow you to say, okay, once a week on Monday, we've got the first 16 lines. All right, let's go through them again. And now this week we're adding another 10. Let's go through those 16, and it'll help keep those fresh as well. What do you think of that? Yeah, with having the visuals. So, having a system, I think, is the bottom line. Having a system, being consistent with it, using visualization, organizing in an orderly fashion. Those are all the tips that help you teach your students how to memorize. And they've known those forever. I mean, again, as I started out, there's no new secrets. They have known how to do this. The last thing, last couple of tips that Mr. Campbell had were consider incentives, but make it reasonable. So when I would have my 6 weeks to memorize the Lord's Prayer in Spanish or French, if they memorized it within the first 2 weeks, they got bonus points. If the whole class memorized it within the first 2 weeks, obviously this is to my advantage. If the whole class memorized it within the first 2 weeks, that class got a pizza party. Now that created peer pressure, because when everybody except 2 students have said it, I'm not the one that's pushing those 2 students to get that pizza party. It's going to be their peers. But to make it work, I don't want you to think you have to bribe them. And finally, give your students opportunities to recite, to perform, to show off what they have memorized, and celebrate those opportunities. And I do think that is a very valuable tip.
One thing I found out when it was doing the big long poems, that they would do almost anything. They knew they were going to get to wear a little tiny piece of costume.
Yes.
I put, like mouse ears on the headband. Oh, what do I get? One, a beard. Okay, I have a part, and I'm going to get to stand next to everybody, but I'll tell you, it didn't take very much.
Yeah, it does not, but it's the opportunity to perform and to demonstrate their knowledge, and that has so many positive consequences that it is quite worth it.
I also threatened them sometimes. You were not going to stand up there and hear this whole class in front of your parents.
Well, that's true too. Okay, my time is up. Thank you for coming, and I hope you will remember these.